I promised you to get a behind-the-scenes, the vision and the lessons learned about one of the most successful co-locations in our business. And actually, it's now my pleasure to ask up on stage the two people who are going to talk about it. Bill Darcy is the CEO with the Kitchen and Bath Association. And again, all of their information is in your binder and your mobile app. And then Jerry Howard, who is the CEO of the National Association of Home Builders. The stage is yours.
Before 2013, I don't think Bill or I would have ever imagined that we'd be standing here saying that we have a very successful and, in fact, growing co-located show concept. But oftentimes we're not masters of our own destiny. And you all know what happened back in 2008. The housing market completely crashed while the rest of the world considers what we've been through a great recession. I can tell you in the housing industry, we went through a Great Depression. As great for our sector of the economy as the stock market crash that we all studied about in our history books in the 1920s. For our organization, our membership declined from about 250,000 member firms down to about 120,000. Our trade show went from over 105,000 attendees to fewer than 50,000 attendees. And the show floor space declined by more than half. So things were looking very bad for the trade show. Things were looking bad in the industry. And I knew that from experience working with my friend in the back, Mark Purcell, that once a trade show starts down, we were told, it often doesn't come back. And Mark and I were very concerned about that, bringing Jeff Cassidy and Michael Currier into the room with us. What are we going to do? And then fortunately my phone rang, and it was Bill. And he said, let's talk about co-locating. And that's what it took off from there. We sat down and we started to discuss how we could co-locate the two shows.
And as you can imagine, having two volunteer-led organizations, in addition to the fact that NKBA used Emerald Expositions to produce KBIS, having three institutions come together and try to figure this out. We knew what we thought needed to happen, but for much during this process, I really wondered if we could logistically pull this off.
It's a decision that you can't take lightly. I mean, you look at those gear wheels and you have two that are connected and one that's not connected and NKBA found itself in the middle, having very similar in some cases philosophy to NAHB, but a very different culture. While we were both nonprofit trade associations, the culture of NAHB and the interaction of its members and its staff and its leadership is much different than that for NAHB and NKBA. They were very different. And then you throw in a for-profit organization that had to be at the table, and you had to work out a serious dynamic shift. So it took a long time. Actually, I remember the first meeting, Mark Purcell and I flew to Chicago and had dinner with Bill and his leadership and Susie Williford just to get to know each other. And that meeting itself, I think, is what really spawned the formal discussions that followed.
And right out of the box, 2014, the first co-location exceeded our expectations. We knew the market wanted it, we knew the attendees wanted it, and everybody wanted it. But it was quite amazing to see coming out of the recession for the economy how much the entire industry supported it, right out of the box. We then, going through the timeline, negotiated in 2015 our first extension through 2020. And right now we're working on our next extension, which we hope will be longer than the last. Right, Jerry?
God willing and the creek don't rise, yeah. We knew that we would face challenges, and I mentioned the cultural challenges that we faced, and I think it'll be beneficial for us to talk to you about some of those challenges, and then we'll look at a few of the surprises that we encountered along the way. The cultural challenges came not only from the staffs, and they came from the actual industry segments. Although we're all under the housing umbrella, there is a very, very distinct difference in the personality makeups and the way they do business between the design component and the construction component. Our organization completely represents construction. Our organizational culture is like the construction sector, and the design sector, of course, is its own different animal. So it was very important that Bill and I set the proper tone of cooperation and collaboration between the two cultures.
For us as well, it was a significant operational issue in that when we came to the agreement on the co-location, we still had to produce a show in April of that year and simultaneously work with NAHB to plan the next year's event. So it was very, very tricky for us and our partners at Emerald Expositions to figure out how we were going to do it. And magnifying that, 2013 was NKBA's 50th anniversary. So we had a lot of pressure on us to produce a celebratory event simultaneously while planning our first ever co-location.
And again, because of the various cultures and the histories of the two organizations, you can see that this year is our 75th anniversary. There is a very strong branding bond to the individual shows. And Bill and I realized that if we were going to make this successful for our members, we had to maintain the very distinct nature of the two shows, both in terms of what they present to the attendees, in terms of the exhibits and the education components, but also the social components that represented strong cultural ties individually. Now for NAHB, as I told you, at our lowest we were 120,000 members. Happily we're back up to about 150,000 now. 150,000 mostly small business women and men. I can tell you that despite the size of our organization, it's a hands-on organization. And people love the International Builders Show. For many of our members, the only interaction they have with our national organization is at the International Builders Show. We couldn't afford to dilute that in any way, shape, or form. And they wouldn't have let us dilute that in any way, shape, or form. So as we worked to collaborate, we also had to work to maintain our identities.
Yeah, unlike NAHB, with the builder community, we're an all-industry association, so manufacturers are our members, exhibitors are our members. They sit on our board of directors as well as the small businesses. So this was a dynamic that was interesting to kind of work out between the two organizations. As Jerry said, the pride in the individual brands was a big selling point for each of us to talk to our leadership about, to not lose that brand identity that was so important to them, as I'm sure you all would understand. And you can certainly understand the massive logistical undertaking just to put all this together. A quick shout out to Susie Williford, the NKBA team, Brian Pagel at Emerald Expositions, and Mark in the beginning, Mark Purcell, and then Jeff Cassidy, who really rolled their sleeves up and did all the heavy lifting behind the scenes to create this situation that Jerry and I could go back to our leaderships and sort out. But they did so much work behind the scenes, and we're just very grateful for all that work.
Again, the most important component, aside from satisfying our members, was bringing together the different management and business philosophies of the three players. As I mentioned, NAHB and NKBA have similar mindsets as non-for-profits, but bringing the Emerald team in was, I think, at least for the NAHB staff, the most challenging of the issues that we faced. Not because of anything against Emerald, just because they are a for-profit, completely motivated by the bottom line, and trade associations aren't. And so we had to make sure that we were able to overcome that kind of mindset, both on our parts, but also on the part of Emerald.
Again, respecting the give and take along the way, it continues today. And one of the first, I didn't really know Jerry all that well when I called him, and certainly I've gotten to know him well over the years, but one of the first things that struck me was one of our first large in-person meetings, Emerald, NKBA, NAHB, we're sitting at Jerry's office, 30, 40 people around a big hollow square, and we're talking about pain points, like what is a situation where, how are we going to resolve that we have to talk about. So we had a member rate for KBIS where an NKBA member would get a discounted registration. International Builder Show did not. So Jerry leans over and says to me, how important is this member rate to you? And I'm like, and I look at Susie and she's like, we have to have it. So Jerry pointed to one of his staff members who I didn't know at the time, and he said, okay, make it so. We have a member rate for International Builder Show. And not only this person, but many of the other staff that work with this person were sitting there in shock, not understand. They were almost saying to themselves, we can't do that. And And to me, that was NAHB's commitment to NKBA out of the box, that here's something that's important to our partners who we're just getting into this partnership with, that we have to have it, so that means they have to have it. And to me, it really spoke to me about the partnership that we launched with them to create this event, because to this day, we still have a lot of give and take along the way.
Well, it wasn't that easy. The guy who I ordered to do that ultimately quit. Mark, it's great to see you again. We faced another major challenge, because just as we got things ironed out and we were working through everything in Las Vegas, it came time to move the show to Orlando. And this is where NKBA made a commitment to NAHB. NKBA hadn't done a show in Orlando for a long time, if ever, whereas NAHB rotates between Orlando and Las Vegas. And NKBA wasn't crazy about Orlando, but they were crazy about the co-location. And so we had to take the whole logistical pyramid and puzzle of issues that we dealt with before and redo them again in Orlando for 2017. It was tough. All of you are show professionals. You know this much better than I do. Orlando's configuration of the exhibit hall isn't as convenient as Las Vegas's for a big show like our co-located show is, transportation issues that Orlando faces, and even some of the entertainment issues that we had. And then you compound that with the fact that the shows were growing and we were actually running short of meeting space. So we had a whole lot of more new negotiations that we had to address before we went to Orlando.
Just to give you all a visual on KBIS in Vegas and IBS in Vegas. So KBIS was in the North Hall, IBS was in Central, and then we had, KBIS had the lower floor of South and IBS had the upper floor of South. We also had a lot of opportunity in Las Vegas to do some other co-locations. International Window Coverings event was there. Informa's event, Surfaces, was at Mandalay Bay. And the International Market Center's Las Vegas Market coordinated their dates. So a badge registrant got a lot of value in going to Las Vegas and be able to go to a lot of different things for that one badge. So, you know, here we go to Orlando, as Jerry mentioned, and not only we're going to a new city, but a new floor plan. So we did an open floor plan concept there. So we were very nervous about, you know, moving the successful 3-year run in Vegas to a different city with a different floor plan. But thankfully, it all worked out.
It did work out, and I think for me, one of the lessons of that is that the attendees, the women and men in the design sector and the women and men in the construction sector are much more concerned about their experience and how it flows for them than they are about the logistical nightmares that the staff and I have. And I guess that's to be expected, but it worked out very well in Orlando. And now the next challenge that we faced is, Bill touched on this at the outset, the co-location concept was much more successful than we envisioned. And we started running out of meeting space and floor space and even, again, entertainment space. And we had to really sit down and negotiate how we were going to handle that, particularly in light of the fact that Bill and I are committed to making Design and Construction Week the seminal industry trade show event. Our goal is to become the consumer electronics show of housing. And so if we have to handle this kind of logistical problems with the show as it is now, we really need to get our ducks in a row so we can handle it as we move forward.
So we'll go through a few of the goals that we had for the co-location now. One of the things that really was important to us, as well as NAHB, was a stronger collaboration between the two communities. While you would think designers and builders and remodelers all work hand in hand, is those of you who experienced a remodel or buying a home or you know, whatever you're going to do in your home environment and kitchen and bath, it would be nice if these folks worked better together, certainly. So we thought, and really we've seen the impact of that, really bringing all these folks to one platform to have that design community and the construction community work together for really ultimately the best homeowner experience down the road. We're dealing with, you know, obviously we wanted revenue growth. Clearly both shows were coming off tough times, so that was important. And registration as well. Both of our conferences trying to inspire cross-registration and growth there. Supporting organizations. Jerry and I worked very hard on the outset to personally invite, I think it was 100 like industry associations to participate in Design and Construction Week, and we host an annual event there where we get probably 30, 40 around a table and talk about, like issues and challenges. And right now, skilled labor is one of the challenges that we have that's very similar amongst all our industry. So it's really provided a great forum for that. And certainly the media interest has been significant. Just incremental media interest has been amazing to see. So as these exhibitors for both KVIS and IBS were really ultimately being forced to choose one or another. As much as it's important in both communities, they were trying to find creative ways to go and reach these communities without building a booth and then 3 months later building another booth and all the costs that go along with that.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that I come from a political environment. And in a political environment, the housing sector, and it doesn't matter which group you're talking about, the housing sector prefers to get in an inward-facing circle and open fire at each other. And it's difficult to get people to stand in a circle and work together. So we had to take some of the lessons that we had learned from our coalition building efforts here in Washington and apply them to the trade show industry, and specifically with respect to supporting organization engagement. We offer these other organizations not only a chance for their members to interact with Bill's members and my members, who are either their customers or their contractors, but we also offer the staffs to take advantage of the scope and size of our mutual staff efforts and expertise. NAHB particularly offers expertise in economics and in political fundraising and also in legislative advocacy. Some of the other groups can piggyback off that, attend some of our big meetings on the Hill and in regulatory agencies, and we're working well together. So as we combine and co-locate the shows, we're combining and co-locating a lot of our other professional efforts as well.
Now we're going to take you through some of the surprises, the good surprises and the not so good surprises. Logistically, I think a big factor in helping us get this off the ground was that Experian did both registrations for both shows, and Freeman was a partner for both of us. So going into this co-location, knowing that we had the same large partners, made co-locating so much easier. But continuously, the volunteer leadership and members, we have to continue to remind them that this was for the greater good. They were giving up a little bit of their own brand for the better of the whole. So, again, that's an ongoing challenge, and we continue to work on it. Certainly seeing the success has helped, help with some of the processing of some of that. So really, a lesson learned here is find ways to emphasize the strengths of one another's organizations to accommodate that.
Yeah, and I think another issue was we touched on it already, the infrastructure in the two cities and the two convention spaces, making sure that the leadership of both organizations has access to the suites and hotel rooms that they want, making sure that the organizations are blended but not completely apart. And when you talk about the blending of the show floors, that was particularly important to us on the IBS side. Because what we bring to the table is many more people than NKBA does. And we could not have, as the IBS hosts, all of our members going over to the much sexier, cooler exhibits at NKBA and our exhibit booths getting less and less traffic. So we had to work out a way to handle that. And credits to Jeff Cassidy and Michael Currier and Brian Pagel for making that smooth of a transition. Likewise, we had to be able to integrate the two shows and the combined show into the changing technology in your industry. And you all know a whole lot more about that than I do, but the lead tracking on phones, the apps for the shows, the GPSs that people want to have to find their way around, all of that kind of stuff had to be combined and coordinated in a way that we'd never had undertaken before. That was an interesting element of the whole thing.
Another thing for us was opening ceremonies. Do you have two or you have one? So, again, what we always try to look through it for the eyes of the attendee. It is a pride thing as well, where to have an opening kickoff to your event. NAHB does a fantastic job with their opening session, 5,000 to 6,000 people, a huge undertaking. So we really had to make a conscious decision whether we wanted to do our own thing and just because we could, but was that really the right thing for the attendee to kick off Design and Construction Week? So we compromised, and Jerry's team works with us on that. they foot much of the bill, and they have much of the control. But I think it was a good compromise for us because I think it's the right thing for the attendee to come experience a grand opening of Design and Construction Week. Another thing was, I talked a little bit about media relations priorities and practices. There's some bloggers in the room here. Not a lot of bloggers were coming to the International Builder Show in the past. So as you look at PR and media opportunities, how do you approve different media entities to come? A lot of the hard media that comes to IBS, we were grateful to have more of those folks, participating with KBIS, and we try to educate the NAHB folks about the importance of the blogger community in the design space. So, the merging of that was a challenge, and we've worked through all that. The last thing is the best practices of each organization. So, taking advantage of what each organization was doing, and for us, it was not only NKBA, it was Emerald Expositions, and the best practices of an organization that has 85, 90, I'm losing track, David. A lot of trade shows that they run, and they certainly are doing this every day, every week, year round. So taking advantage of that best practices and in the dynamics that we have in the large scale is a lot of fun and a lot of opportunity to improve the experience for the exhibitor and the attendee.
Yeah, just touching a little bit on what Bill was talking about with respect to the media. It underscores the difference between the design community and the construction community. Construction community will read the Wall Street Journal, they'll read the New York Times, they'll read their local newspapers, and they'll watch largely Fox News. Whereas Bill's membership is significantly younger and in a lot of ways much more tech savvy and liberal than ours. So to blend those two together has made the whole dynamic of our media relations more effective. And for the supporting organizations then, a lot of those organizations didn't have access to either of the elements of the media that we brought to the table. We're able to give them more access to the media, which in the end, from again my political perspective, only makes the industry a whole lot stronger and more unified. But I think what we really realized through all this is that while it's very easy for Bill and I to sit in our offices and make pronouncements about what we're going to do, and there's a lot of my staff and former staff in the room, I think they'll acknowledge I'm really good at that. But doing the details is a whole nother mess. And decisions that Bill and I made, and even just communications that we had about where we thought it should go, filters down not only through our own staffs, but also through the Emerald staff. And we really needed to coordinate and compromise, again, the cultures, the business goals, and the professional working styles of three very distinct organizations.
So I think we've built quite an amazing success story in a very short amount of time, exceeded all of our growth expectations. We're pushing convention centers to their limits. We were nearly bound in Orlando. In Vegas in the future, and I know John Schreiber's here, I had heard, I don't know if you've heard this, Jerry, we're looking at a 300,000 square foot tent in the future in Vegas for the parking lot because there's not enough room. So we hope that you can speed up, talk to Rossi and Chris, and speed that expansion plan up for us. Across the board, attendance, media, everything. All that said, we can't be complacent. We have to continue to innovate. We have to continue to meet exhibitor and attendee expectations, exceed their expectations. We have to work through infrastructure issues. We do have, as we put pressure on these convention centers, in Orlando with transportation. These are real challenges that we have to give those the attendees, exhibitors, the best experience possible. So even though we've had the success, we're not going to be complacent about it. We're going to continue to try to innovate and improve.
Yeah, and I have to say both the city of Las Vegas and the city of Orlando have been incredibly willing and engaging partners in all this as well. The best example I can give is the city of Las Vegas, knowing that I'm an Oakland Raider fan, is moving my team to their city just to make sure the IBS, that's a good step. Thank you for that. Really, I just want to say that, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, Mark Purcell and I had a trade show consultant come in and tell us that once a show starts down, they almost never come back. For our organization, the Builders Show brings in about 1/3 of our budgeted revenue each year. We couldn't afford for that to happen. Now, would we have come back if we'd stayed separate? Jeff Cassidy, Mark Purcell, and I have argued about that into the wee hours of the morning many, many times. But the fact is that we collaborated, we co-located, and we stemmed the decline of the IBS, and it came back bigger, better, and stronger than it's ever been. But more importantly, Design and Construction Week is now an established brand of its own that we look to expand in the United States and globally. And it's all because of the efforts of 3 organizations working together to a common end.
We appreciate the opportunity. It's been my first time here. Great event, great networking, a lot of great people in the room, so we appreciate the opportunity to come talk with you today.
Thank you all very much.
No, we want questions, Q&A.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, you're not going to get off so soon. So you certainly caught my attention. You want this wonderful co-location to become the consumer electronics show of the builders industry.
Go big or go home.
Go big or go home.
We told the cities, Sam, we're coming big. Are you ready for big?
I think that's very exciting. I would imagine that got tweeted out by somebody or other. And I can hear Gary Shapiro getting a little nervous already. Wait a minute. We got to stay on top of that. Considering what you just mentioned and shared, which we appreciate, about the amount of work, and declaring something from the corner office certainly doesn't mean it happens. How do you have is there a dictator? Is there a project manager? Because there ultimately has to be somebody who is making decisions. And as you add more and more and more pillars to this creation, then it's going to be even more important to have a project manager or someone. How does that work? What's that role called? And how has it evolved?
It's different for both of us, but one thing that has impressed me just myself is that Jerry and I don't have to talk that frequently. So that to me is a very encouraging thing about how our staffs have really bought into the culture of what we expect. There are occasions where there's big things that we have to sort out, but for NKBA, it's Susie Williford. They have ongoing Brian, Susie, Jeff calls. These are the staple calls that a lot of decisions get made for us.
Yeah, I think that question, I think, highlights the distinct differences between the organizations. For me, the team is part of our staff. It's led by Jeff Cassidy, and he has a whole group that spends virtually all their time working on the International Builder Show and now Design and Construction Week. For NKBA, it's their external vendor, Emerald, that is the partner, and they just have to keep coordinating together. As we add shows to the co-location agreement, what we find, Sam, is that they all have either an internal staff person or an external person that then comes in and plugs in and works with our team to get the job done.
Okay, thank you. Question right here, and please also be sure to introduce yourself.
Nathan Morris, International Production and Processing Expo. I answered no to the co-location part, but we are 3 associations, very, very similar associations, a meat and a poultry and a feed, we've created an integrated show, we call it. Is there any crossover in your membership, in your exhibitors, or your attendees? And if not, does that make a co-location a lot easier?
The answer is yes, 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 and no. Yeah, there are people that are members of both of our organizations. There are people that have attended in the past both shows. And probably the hardest thing to negotiate was how to handle the crossover exhibitors. And so with respect to membership, there's nothing we can do about that. In fact, we would encourage professionals to be members of both organizations. With respect to attendance, we let them register for whichever show they want, and their registration is good at both of on the show floor for both components. With respect to the exhibitors, that was, as I said, the most difficult element in this. What we did was we looked at the KBIS exhibitor list, we looked at the NAHB exhibitor list, then we deduped them. Those who were only NAHB exhibitors remain only NAHB IBS exhibitors, and likewise those that were KBIS and NKBA exhibitors. Those that we had in common, we developed a formula for what determined that they were common. Because remember, we were doing all this during the recession or the depression, and a lot of people who had exhibited stopped exhibiting in any show. And we had hoped and we planned for people coming back, and we wanted to make sure that there were as few disagreements as possible. And so what we did was we developed a formula, and there's a group of common exhibitors, and they can locate on either the IBS floor or the KBIS floor, and we split the revenue equally. That's been a pretty effective way of handling it. It's not perfect, it's not flawless, and we're constantly tweaking it. In fact, as we talk about the future, we'll be tweaking that element.
Yes, a question from the mobile app, please.
How do your associations apportion show infrastructure assets, such as investment in event technologies?
Well, remember, we keep the shows are still separate shows, so a lot of the costs are borne independently. For infrastructure such as transportation, we do it proportionally.
Yeah, so I remember in the early negotiations we had, you couldn't really, in the time we had to create and develop and execute, there wasn't enough time to work out every nuance. So we said, the big pain points would be clearly transportation. You can't have two different bus companies or two different busing services, that type of thing. But there are some things still that are independent. I think as the attendee is really, driving what they want. So as we look at technology, these are conversations that we have to have with Emerald, with NAHB, as a community to say, this is what the community wants. Do we want to jointly invest in this? We've done some joint investment in marketing to promote Design and Construction Week. So it really varies based on the magnitude of the attendee experience, component.
Question?
Hi, Bob Hughes with NACS. A question, I understand the revenue, well, I don't, but in concept understand the revenue split, but in a lot of cases where you have overlapping exhibitors, you're taking money out of their spend. Are you seeing that they are just happily pocketing that and walking away, or are they reinvesting it in your industries in a different way?
Well, one of the largest example I know is one of the largest brands, knowing that the commitment of financial commitment they made for us, which we knew, we didn't certainly know at IBS, but the magnitude of their booth, you could do the math and figure it out. They have invested with new booths, bringing more people. Back in the day, the good old days, there was a lot of parties and big events, especially for KBIS. We have a very social community. It was who was invited to which manufacturer's event that evening, and that declined to the point of almost non-existence in the recession, where you're seeing that come back. So we can't really, for KBIS, qualify exactly, but we do see the exhibitor community investing some of those funds back in the event and the people and the entertainment and how they demonstrate their products in the booths.
We see the same thing, and we bring them in as sponsors, not just for entertainment, but we have them sponsoring, for example, our ongoing education efforts and some of the other meetings and events that we have during the course of the year. We've taken and given them much more flexibility with their marketing dollars than just the booths. And in the end, we've seen the same amount of money, in fact, maybe more. We've seen happier exhibitors, and we've seen growth in the shows and overall growth in the associations.
Okay, I have another question for you. Without going into details, divulging anything that might be proprietary, there are advantages. I used to run some very large trade shows. There's advantages to scale, and there's disadvantages. You mentioned Freeman and Experience, obviously the host city of Las Vegas and Orlando. What would you say were the biggest advantages of scale, working with cities and contractors, suppliers, and what were you a little bit surprised at as far as the disadvantage of scale?
For me, the advantages obviously are the willingness of the hotels and the convention centers when you're using more of their properties to be flexible in all the arrangements. There's no question that both cities, Orlando and Las Vegas, want to be known as the #1 convention city. And when Bill and I tell them that we're trying to be the consumer electronics show of housing, they are very willing to work with us. No question that that's a result of the co-location. To me, the biggest disadvantage has been some of the transportation. I think the design component of the industry is much more patient than the construction component. Our guys hate waiting in cab lines, and Jeff Cassidy and I, for example, get beat up about that all the time. Cab lines were bad during IBS, they're even worse now. So transportation, I think, is the biggest downside for me.
It's really all the growing pains that come with, all the things you hope to have, which cause those other type of problems. Longer cab lines, less places to sit when in the food court, if you would. Rooms book up quicker, so now somebody can't find a room, or it's too big, I don't want to go, type of thing. So trying to give the attendee, like recognizing those things are challenges and trying to get in front of them as best you can. But it's certainly more in the pros than the cons.
Yeah, we'd had a 4-day show during the height of the housing boom in the early 2000s. During the recession, we brought it down to a 3-day show, and now some of our members are saying to us, it's so big, it's so good, we need to go back to a 4-day show now.
That's great. That's a wonderful trend line. Any more questions from the app, or right there, there's one. Go ahead, please. And then over here, okay.
Donna Shafali, Direct Marketing Association of Washington. I'm just curious, how far out are you booking for future now? Are you 5, 10 years out?
Eternity. The IBS traditionally books as far out as 10 years in advance. Now with the co-location, and especially if we continue to grow, we're probably going to have to go beyond that.
Yeah, it's more than 10.
Okay, here we have another question right here.
Hi, great presentation, thank you. We're actually working on something similar. We're becoming more of a super show, and some smaller shows are co-locating with us, and obviously there's going to be multiple of them, and our first big one will be this next year. So my question is, when you agree to disagree, have you set up any type of mechanism for how you do dispute resolution or get past those types of things? Because obviously, as well as you two get along, there are going to be things that you forget about, don't realize will happen, and wind up coming up even on the day the show begins.
We just keep arguing until one wins.
7 rounds, Marcus of Queensberry rules. Yeah. 7 rounds, Marcus of Queensberry rules.
Yeah.
No, we just have to talk it through.
Yeah, it happens, and we talk it through. And sometimes we get to a stalemate, we're like, we just got to wait this out a little bit, and then we revisit it, and because those things do come up. It's amazing how many of those things continue to come up, even with the magnified success. But you talk about the volunteer leadership side of many of you with associations, and with the terms, people are coming into an environment where it was always great and huge. Well, no, it wasn't. And so some of the people that lived through that period of demise, they're really not saying a word. They're just thrilled as the success happens. And some of the newer people come in and they're like, "How are we? What are you doing about it?" And it reverts back a lot to me the brand pride. You can't, the belief in the association. It's a wonderful thing how strongly these members feel about the organization that they are part of. But when they have to share it, it's challenging. So I get beat up, Jerry gets beat up, we argue, and then we kind of work through it. But I think always knowing that it's for the good of the whole, it's for the good of the industry, that we have to figure out a way to make this work, allows us to really come to compromise, very often. Do the volunteers get involved at all, or do you keep them out? So we NKBA specifically went through a governance restructure 3 years ago that just went live in January of 16. So our environments could not be any different right now. So that's another thing where I tease Jerry frequently as often as I can about it, when there are decisions that need to be made that in traditional association environments, you would expect that you would go back and kind of, I'm very blessed right now with a board that gives me generally full control without creating a disaster. So there's a lot of things that I don't need the blessing of the board to make a decision on, but I respect the fact that very recently that wasn't the case. So I can totally respect a lot of the things that Jerry goes through, and it's not like we're coming from different places. So when he talks about a challenge, it's not like it's unique to me to understand what that is. I'm just very fortunate in this current time right now that it's not magnified for me. So we work with him like we had with our prior leadership and association culture, because trying to keep the volunteers out of the weeds and let them handle the fiduciary and strategic responsibilities is a part of everybody's association business.
Our board is over 2,000 people.
And our board is 9.
That's our board of directors. And to say that builders are engaged in everything that we do would be a gross understatement. So what I have effectively, I hope, imparted onto my staff is to use the builder members as a sword and a shield use them to shield them from decisions when you can, and use them to be aggressive and make the decisions when you can. And so they're engaged a lot. Fortunately, they have ultimately, I think, given a great deal of respect to the professional capacity of the staff. And really, at this point, a lot of it is a rubber stamp. But we do have to go through a very convoluted approval process. Our board meetings take over a week and cost $1 million.
One thing uniquely for us, too, is the exhibitors, again, are part of our member community and are on our board. So we have an annual gathering that Brian and the Emerald staff participates in to talk about challenges for the exhibitors, where it's more unique than NAHB, who doesn't have 5 exhibitors talking to them about, I mean, these are the people that are really driving the revenue for the event. The attendee experience is, equally important and where we focus. But again, having those folks on our board, we hear a lot more directly about a different type of environment because they are exhibitors and, what things cost and that type of thing.
Using the gear graphic, which was so wonderful, if NAHB is over there and your kitchen and bath is in the middle and Emerald is on the lower left, how, and considering so many people from Emerald are in the room, how has the relationship, how has Emerald changed in the last 2.5 years because of this partnership, and how has Home Builders changed in the last 2.5 years, and how have you survived?
I think you probably have to ask them.
7 rounds, Marcus of Queensberry rules.
Okay.
No, that was, I think, to be perfectly honest, the most significant challenge that we faced. If you want to look at it another way, you can look at it as you have Emerald and NKBA on one side of the ledger and NAHB on the other side. And that's what we've had to be very careful to guard against, particularly when you overlay the fact that our members are so involved and they say to us, how did you ever get us into a conversation where it's 2 against 1 all the time? And that's where the goodwill that Bill and NKBA and their leaders have engendered with our members helps us a great deal. Emerald owes nothing to NAHB. NAHB owes nothing to Emerald, but we have to work together if we're going to make this a success.
I think we've really, in my 11 years with NKBA, and Brian knows this because he and I kind of started at the responsibility at the same time of the trade show, that there was a long period of NKBA's 50-year history that NKBA staff didn't pay a lot of attention to the operational or growth side of the show. It was multiple different organizations that ultimately became Emerald that managed it. But when I started getting involved and some others, we really took an active, and for us, it's 60% of our revenue. So the strategic direction is very important to us. So we've had a great partnership and try to figure things out, because every day, I mean, Susie and Brian on a day-to-day basis or multiple times a day basis are sorting things out because they not only help us, and produce the event, but also are involved in understanding and helping the association and what's important to us.
Again, thank you so much for your candor and your wisdom. Thank you. Thank you.